School-wide approaches to positive behavior supports. When you're screwing up and nobody says anything to you anymore, that means they've given up on you. Hopefully that's not the case, things that you are seeing in your school, but I do think that there are definitely students that at some point in time, they certainly feel that people have given up on them. So think about some of the things that you do see at your school. What kinds of challenges are there that are going on within the classroom, within maybe the hallways or the school bus or other environments that are impacting the either learning of other students or the social relationships that folks are having? As we think about school-wide approaches to positive supports, there's some things that kind of focus on the individual themselves. So some interventions that we might see that focus on individuals are interventions like peer mediation. And peer mediation is a technique in which one student or several students are taught how to be good mediators. There's a very formal process in which they're taught how to do that, and then they intervene in situations where other students are having difficulty. And they typically intervene in smaller kinds of problems. You know, someone doesn't want to play with somebody else at recess, or a student says something about another person behind their back. They usually deal with things that are a little bit less complicated, but sometimes students will listen to their peers before they'll listen to an adult. Another individual type of intervention are Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And as we looked at SRBI, RTI in an earlier discussion, there's Tier 2 and Tier 3 academic supports, but there's also Tier 2 and Tier 3 behavioral supports. So students who go beyond what the school's approach to supporting positive behaviors are, they may get a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 intervention. Typically, Tier 2 interventions are things that offer up a little bit more support within the classroom. So many of the things that you might see that people are describing as particular supports for a specific student, you might see someone who comes to class with a card that the teacher has to check off. Did they do these certain things, or did they not do certain things? Those I would consider Tier 2 supports. You know, here's your smiley face card. You did a good job. You didn't do a good job. Tier 3 interventions are really looking at things that are more specific to a particular child. Tier 3 interventions are really at the point of looking at an individual's positive behavior support plan. And when we look at an individual positive behavior support plan, we need to look at what kinds of target behaviors and challenging behaviors is this student exhibiting, and what do we think it is that they are trying to communicate with those behaviors. So that support plan should be very specific to a particular individual. Another option for an individual support is punishment. You'll notice that there's an asterisk next to punishment. Punishment is a really tricky type of intervention. Punishment comes with a whole array of problems. One of the things that is really problematic about punishment is that oftentimes you can't possibly take away enough things or force a child into some task that they don't want to do within the context of a school environment. So you see teachers do things like take away recess or take away other privileges. But generally when students are having some really significant behavioral issues, they're past the point of losing recess as being a consequence that has any meaning for them. So punishment is it's not very effective. The other thing is that oftentimes the person who is the one who is held responsible for implementing these punishments doesn't usually feel very good about this. So I would encourage you to stay away from situations where we're taking away from students or we're putting them in situations where we are expecting them to engage in a different behavior to get back into the classroom or back into the teacher's good graces. Think, sort of that old-fashioned writing on the board of I will not talk in class, I will not talk in class, I will not talk in class. what exactly did that accomplish? So those are things that we want to try to stay away from. Other things that we might be looking at, in some schools they still have teams called student assistance teams, where a group of teachers and other professionals in the school will get together on a regular basis to discuss challenges that students are having behaviorally within the context of the school. When we look at building individual skills, some of the things that you might be seeing are things like character education programs, where we're really building on them having better skills. We look at character education programs with things like, these are the pillars of good behavior. These are things that we expect are behaviors that students will exhibit, and you're taking the time to teach what those particular behaviors are. Developmental guidance programs are things like Second Step. Second Step does a lot of practice. Here's the scenario. What would you do in this situation? What are your other options? Second Step can go actually all the way up into the middle school level, although it seems to typically be used in the younger elementary grades. I believe that folks don't particularly like the way that Second Step looks after probably about grade 3. So most of the schools that I've had contact with are not using it past grade 3. Another way of building skills in individuals is a program called Ruler. Ruler comes out of Yale. There's actually a video that you'll have access to a little bit later in this presentation that explains Ruler and the basis of Ruler. But Ruler is really a program to build students' social emotional skills. But it also looks at building those same skills in the faculty and the staff, because they are really the role models for students. Another option for developing individual types of skills are programs like Choose Love, which is a program that Scarlett Lewis put together after her son Jesse was killed at Sandy Hook. And her premise behind Choose Love is that individuals that are engaging in problem kinds of behaviors are not being loved. They're not being welcomed into the community. And the more that people love each other and express love and kindness, that some of those kinds of behaviors will go away. It's really a social emotional program and building those kinds of relationship skills. Another program that fits into that kind of category is a program called Start with Hello, which basically literally starts with hello. So you really start building relationships and helping students have friends and other individuals that they're connected to at school. Dylan's Wings of Change, or the Wingman program, is also a program that came out of the Sandy Hook tragedy. His parents put this together as a reaction to the loss of his life, and it kind of works very much like the idea of what is a wingman. Who is the wingman when you're flying the plane? The wingman is looking at the wing to see what's coming and to help you negotiate and travel through whatever situation you're in. So the Wingman program is really built on the premise of doing mentoring. Older students are set up with younger students, and they help guide them into better reactions to things, better behaviors. So they have an opportunity to really be facilitated into doing, making more positive choices. And again, another way of development is an individualized positive behavior support plan. One of the important things about an individualized positive behavior support plan is that it should have things that go on before the individual engages in the problem behavior. So it really should be a skill building program. It should be a plan that gives them lots of proactive opportunities to build good communication skills and to build other skills that reduce the likelihood that that individual will engage in some kind of problem behavior. Of course, as part of an individualized positive behavior support plan, there's a clear set of guidance of what you would do if the individual does actually engage in the problem behavior. So when we look at school-wide types of supports, some interventions that you may see are restorative discipline practices or restorative practices. Those actually come out of the judicial, the justice system, out of the prison system, actually, of if you make a mistake and the only thing that happens is that you get punished for that mistake, the likelihood that you're going to continue to make that mistake is probably quite good. If you make a mistake and you have an opportunity to rectify your mistake or to restore, so to speak, then you have a better chance of not continuing to make the same mistake over and over again. So when we look at students who are engaging in behaviors in our schools that we don't want them to engage in, if they have opportunities to stop, process, this is usually done in a group type of situation, whether it's a small group or it might actually be an entire classroom. If the individual is causing a disruption to the entire classroom, the whole class may meet after this individual is at a point where they're able to discuss it, and the individual has an opportunity to sort of restore the relationships that they may be causing problems with. There's a little snippet of restorative practices in a PBIS video that you'll have access to a little later in this this presentation. Another program that looks at school-wide approaches is called Love and Logic. I have not seen this in action. It was being used in a few schools in one of the districts in the state. I don't know very many places that are using it, but the whole premise behind it is very much kind of a sort of tough love approach of I care for you, I believe in you, I expect the best of you, and when you make a mistake, we're going to stop and we're going to process that and figure out what went wrong and try not to have those things happen again. Peacemaking circles are something that comes out of the Native traditions. Peacemaking circles have some components that actually overlap with restorative practices. Both of those have opportunities where the group gets together to work out a situation that's not working. So you have an opportunity to sort of restore the peace. Second Step has some school-wide component to it. Character education programs have a school-wide component to them as well. The STEPS program, which has been in place in the Southington Public Schools for actually a fair amount of time now, I would say probably maybe 8 or 9 years at this point, is a community-wide approach to supporting students in the schools. It came out of some unfortunately tragic happenings several years back where I believe there were actually 3 students at the high school who committed suicide over the course of an academic year. And the community actually brought the STEPS program into Southington because the community as a whole felt that there needed to be something done to try to address the needs and challenges that students were having. So it's a school-wide approach. It's a community-wide approach. Many of the community agencies that have contact with children, like the YMCA or camps or religious-based programs, all follow the principles of STEPS, which comes out of an institute in Colorado, and it's a very organized approach where you build capacity for the individual. So you build relationships for the individual, you build other skills that they need. It works on building, I believe there's 40 assets. So the more assets you have, the less likely it is that you will do things that are not in your best interest or the best interest of those around you. School-wide positive behavior intervention systems, or school-wide PBIS, are another approach that a school might use, where you go in and you really spend time teaching students what kinds of behaviors you really expect from them. It's very clear what the expectations are. There's clear expectations for all the different environments at the school. And then students are given some kind of positive intervention after they are doing the things that you want them to do. So they are given different opportunities to either gain tangibles or social praise, that students are recognized when they're doing the right thing, as opposed to waiting for somebody to do something that is not a behavior that you want. As we look at the school as a professional learning community, some other things that we might see that help build school-wide supports are looking at peer leadership. How can I build peers into being good role models and helping lead their classmates into more appropriate and positive kinds of behaviors? You may use social contracts with students. So you may set up a contract in your class. These are the expected behaviors in this class. If students engage in the behaviors that are expected, this is what happens. If students don't engage in those behaviors, this is what the consequence would be. The more family involvement we have within the context of the school, the better the chances are of reducing school-wide kinds of behavioral problems. Faculty and staff certainly need to role model the behaviors that we want students to have. So it's very important that staff and faculty are aware that the behaviors that they're exhibiting are behaviors that students are watching, and that we want to make sure that we're being really good role models. The STEPS also helps build the professional learning community, and school-wide PBIS also is an opportunity for building a professional learning community. So the Southington STEPS program actually comes from the Search Institute, and it's built on the assets, as I had mentioned earlier. If you want more information about it, you could either look for Southington STEPS, or you could go straight to the original source, which is the Search Institute in Colorado. There's a link here so that you can see a little bit more about the Ruler program. And there's a link here of restorative justice, restorative practices. So I would encourage you to take a look at those two videos. As we look at school-wide positive interventions and supports, or school-wide PBIS, one of the things about this program that is different from the other programs that we talked about is that this is a school-wide approach that is built within the school. It's not a program that you contact a publisher for, or you contact another agency for, or you contact a professor at a local university to come in and teach you about their plan. This is a program that is built in the school. It's a grassroots effort. The intention is that each PBIS program that's built is built very intentionally with the specific environment that it's going to be used in. It does not translate well when you try to pick up one school-wide PBIS approach from one school and move it to another. However, you will probably find that there are multiple school districts in the state of Connecticut that have done that. They've created one approach and then they've implemented it in all of the elementary schools, or they've created one approach and implemented it in all of the middle schools, etc. That doesn't usually work, because the system really needs to be done within the context of that particular building by the people who are the stakeholders in that building. So what happens with school-wide PBIS is that there's very clear proactive strategies that define, teach, and support appropriate student behaviors to get a more positive school community. So what the expected behaviors that we have for students are very clearly explained and taught as needed. Typically in elementary schools, there's a lot of modeling that happens with the behaviors that we're looking for. So if we were looking for a very specific set of behaviors to go down the hall to the cafeteria or to walk in the hall, period, teachers would model and have students practice what those behaviors are. Certainly at the middle school and high school level, you probably don't necessarily need to model those, but you certainly need to talk about what the expected behaviors are. If you're in a school that really truly has embraced school-wide PBIS, you'll find that there are signs and posters and clear explanations up all over the school. So there should be clear explanations of what you do in the classroom, what you do in the cafeteria, how you behave on the bus, what happens in the hallway, how do you behave at recess, or out in the courtyard at lunchtime. That it's very clear what the expectations are. So it goes across environments, which is really important because in many situations, teachers who have really good classroom management skills, but there's no school-wide approach to supporting positive behaviors, many times their students go off to the library or the cafeteria or study hall or another class, and things start falling apart because the person who has the good classroom management skills is not there. So an expectation of school-wide PBIS is that there is clear expectations across all environments and that everyone in the school knows what those are. So the person who is serving the tater tots at lunch can praise students when they see the correct behaviors. They know what the behaviors are that students are not supposed to be exhibiting. The custodial staff knows how students are supposed to be behaving in the hallway and that they shouldn't be throwing papers or wrappers on the floor. So if they see students who are doing the right thing, they can give them some positive reinforcement. If they see students who are not doing what they're supposed to do, they can remind them of what the expectations are. So it's really empowering to all of the faculty and staff across the school environment. As I said earlier, it's not a curriculum, it's not a discipline package, it's not a product that you buy. It is something that is put together at the school at the grassroots level that really looks at decision making, planning, and problem solving. So there may be particular problems that are happening in one school that are not happening in another. There's actually a video that will come up in a little bit that you'll see multiple schools in the Chicago public school system using PBIS in varying ways because they've made it individual to their particular school. Actually, it's right here. So some things to be looking for as you're looking for a positive school climate. What you're looking for is increased academic engagement and student achievement is maximized. When you have classrooms that are chaotic, when you have students that are not behaving as we would like them to behave, no one has an opportunity to learn in that environment. That we're creating respectful and responsible behaviors that are actively taught and encouraged. Many places do some positive reinforcement things where students have opportunities to earn access to particular activities or access to tangible types of items. I think that that is a good way to kind of get started, but I think that what also needs to be paired with that is social praise and the respect of the teacher and classmates so that it goes to something that's a little bit more typical in regular life. Generally, when you do the right thing in your life, somebody doesn't run around giving you stickers or something to, put in tickets to put into a lottery. Sometimes folks tell you you're doing a great job, and that's hopefully enough. So we really want to build in that social praise when we work in environments that have school-wide PBIS. That there's a continuum of positive behavior supports that are available to all students. So this is really that Tier 1 intervention is school-wide PBIS. Tier 2 starts looking at potentially individualized types of plans or, more specific types of plans for certain students. And then Tier 3 really starts to look at an individualized plan. That we really want more pro-social behavior and that hopefully students will reduce their rule violating behavior. So you can see here on the left-hand side, it's the academic systems of the tiers. To look at SRBI, generally about 80 to 90% of your students should be in Tier 1 SRBI, about 5 to 10% should be getting Tier 2 SRBI, and about 1 to 5% should be getting Tier 3 SRBI, although we know that that's not always the case in all districts. When we look at the behavioral piece, the Tier 1 piece of behavioral supports should be about 80 to 90% of all the students should be able to do the right thing based on the school-wide approach. About 5 to 10% will have a little bit more intervention, maybe some targeted group types of intervention, the smiley card, the check the box off kind of cards. And then when we get to the top, about 1 to 5% of our student population will need a much more individualized, intensive type of plan that is very specifically set up for them around the kinds of problems that they are having. So one of the things that we're going to take a look at in class is we're going to look at bullying. So between about 1 and 3 students say that they've been bullied at school. Most of the bullying that occurs within the public school system seems to be happening primarily at the middle school, not that it doesn't happen in elementary and high school. About 30% of youth admit to bullying others in surveys. About 71% of youth and staff say they've seen bullying at their school. And the one thing that we know is that when bystanders intervene, bullying stops very quickly. I think this data is not completely accurate. I don't think that students who are being bullied are always letting on that they're being bullied, even if they're being asked to do that within what is being promoted as an anonymous survey. I still think that they think that somehow someone will find out that they told that they were being bullied. The other thing that I think is a real problem is I do think that many times in less severe types of situations, faculty and staff are observing bullying and they are not intervening because they think, oh, kids will be kids. They need to work some stuff out for themselves. This is just what happens. Until fists are flying, no one's saying anything. And it's really important that people say things because it goes down dramatically when someone stops. So we're going to spend some time in class doing a little bit of work looking at bullying. We'll look at a couple of different things to define bullying and some actions that can be taken. So we'll do this when we get together as a group. So just a quick thing about individual positive behavior supports. For those of you who are in the EDU 564 class, you'll spend more time talking about individual positive behavior supports within the context of the section on students who have behavioral disorders, although they are not the only people who have behavior problems. It just happens to be put into that particular module. But just as a reminder, or for those of you who are not in that class at this point, is when we really start looking at an individual student need and recognizing that an individual student needs a positive behavior support plan, it needs to be a comprehensive strategy that addresses the challenging behaviors through a functional assessment, which is incredibly important. There needs to be a functional assessment. And what happens with that functional assessment is that the person who's conducting that functional assessment is gathering information from all the different people who are involved with that particular student, all the folks that are seeing that particular behavior as a problem, looks at a whole variety of potential things that could be impacting that behavior. Is it happening in particular classes? Is it happening with certain types of teachers? Is it happening only in the hallway? Does it only happen in the bathroom? Does it only happen at 10 o'clock in the morning? All of those things lead to a particular piece of information about what is that student communicating. And when we figure out what it is that they're communicating, what we need to do is we need to set up a plan that helps them to have better communication. So, for example, if you had a student who, let's say, always has a problem at 10 o'clock in the morning, and after the team looks at the data, they start to realize that 10 o'clock is about a half hour perhaps before the students have a snack, and the students' behavior changes dramatically after snack. They seem to be more focused, they seem to be more engaged, they don't seem to be having problems. One might come to a conclusion after you've gained enough data that that person is hungry. So maybe one of the interventions that would happen for that particular student is that they get connected in with the school breakfast plan so that you know that that student is eating in the morning and that they're not starving at 10 o'clock in the morning and engaging in problem kinds of behaviors because they're hungry. So that's just a really simple example of how we would look at the communicative function for a student and build a positive behavior change plan.